Hello all, this is Barbara Mann from Your Empowered You, and welcome to our leadership coaching video series. And this is part 2 where we talk about being a successful new manager. And in part 1, we talked about what makes a great leader, like overall what makes a great leader. Now in part 2 and in part 3, we start talking about like specific type of managers. So in part 2, in this video, we're going to be talking about being a successful new manager. So this is geared for people who are maybe interested in becoming managers, or maybe they're already a new manager. And then in part 3, we talk about the next level up, which is being an effective manager of managers. So in part 2, this video, again, we're going to be talking about being a successful new manager. So the first question, whether you're thinking about getting into management or you are a new manager, is, what is your motivator? What is your motivator of why you want to be a new manager? Some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by helping others. Some view it as a stepping stone to get to higher management roles. What is your motivator? It's important to understand what's motivating you to be a manager, and hopefully a lot of it stems from really a desire to help others, see other people succeed. You want to see yourself succeed, obviously, but really coming from a place of helping others, developing others, and growing others, things of that nature. So the other important thing, being a new manager, is really being clear on what your role is as a manager. First and foremost, it's to develop your team. Make sure that you lead your team to meet and exceed the company expectations. Your role is to support and provide the necessary tools for your team's success. It's for career pathing for your team. And it's also to make sure that you and your team are accountable for your results. So we talked about in the first video, additional roles of a manager, but those are some of your key roles as a manager. Now, some of the common missteps that new managers in particular tend to have, or they before they're managers, they tend to think this is what they're going to do when they become a manager. One of the things that they tend to want to do is they feel like they're going to be their friend to their direct report group. And I can tell you, you obviously want to have a healthy relationship with your team members, but thinking that you're a friend and that a friend will always perform for, someone who's your friend, it doesn't work that way. Your job is to help lead them, and sometimes you need to make tough decisions, and it's hard when you're coming from that place of a true friend. You obviously want to have a mutual respect and the things that go into a friendship, but considering a friend relationship, it can create problems. Another common misstep is now that you're in a management role, you're not doing the work anymore. And when you see somebody struggling, sometimes the inclination is to step in and do that work. And that, I can tell you, is avoid that at all costs unless it's an emergency. But doing somebody else's work is a huge misstep because you're masking a problem. And what happens is that if you continue to do this for someone and you're doing part of their work, number one, it's not fair to the coworkers, but number two, if that individual contributor goes to another team, or say you get promoted and there's a new manager, they're going to reveal that someone isn't cutting the mustard and meeting expectations because you've been doing their work. It's a bad thing to do that unless it's a real emergency, because there's times where maybe you do need to help out, obviously. But to make it an everyday practice, avoid that at all costs. Another common misstep is new managers, maybe they don't want to upset the team, and that might stem from wanting to be their friend, or they're doing their work and they're uncomfortable with, the reaction that they may get from their team. But I'm telling you that, you don't need to upset the team, but you may be delivering constructive feedback and they may respond to it, or you may be delivering a change, that is going to cause a reaction from the team. So again, your job is to lead people through adversity, right? Another common misstep is, and this goes into the upsetting the team, be proactive. Don't be reactive. And what I mean by that is that if you see an issue Keep it a molehill. Don't make it a mountain. If you see an issue, you know it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, jump on it quickly and keep it small. Be very, very proactive instead of reactive. Don't make assumptions. Sometimes new managers tend to make assumptions that they'll know what an issue might be with, say, an individual contributor. Avoid assumptions. Keep it neutral. And then finally, another common misstep is miscommunication. So either not wanting to address a situation or not speaking clearly or not being transparent. Those are common missteps of miscommunication. So we are going to talk about the number one trait on being a successful new manager, and really a manager in any sort of capacity. The number one trait is effective communication, because this is really what builds those relationships. Great relationships rely on effective communication. So being open, being honest, being transparent is key. Now, there may be some things that you may not be able to communicate right away to your team, but the more that you can tell your team and just being open and honest, the better. Making sure you're clear and concise. Now, you may think you're clear and concise, but do not assume that everyone understands necessarily what you're communicating. So it's imperative that you reiterate, you make sure people are clear by asking them maybe to repeat it back, but make sure you're clear and concise and people are very, very clear on what your message is. Really, really, really important, because I've seen this a lot of times where a new manager will say, well, I told, so-and-so this, and, they did that. Well, so-and-so may say, I wasn't clear on the message. So it's really important to be very, very clear and make sure they are hearing what you're saying. Another part of effective communication, and I have a video on this next topic, is being a great listener. So really listening to the message from either your manager or your direct report group, it is critical to really listen to your people. Being in that present moment and giving them the time to discuss and really listening to them will help you go a long, long, long way. It helps you learn. It helps you understand. It helps you be in, again, that present moment. You're not thinking about the next sentence. But being a great listener is very important for communication. Your nonverbal is all part of communication. So your facial expressions are critical. So if you have someone who's scowling and who's tense, you can see that in your face. So the more that you're relaxed and you're smiling, the better. You're setting the tone for your team, and that comes a lot of times through your nonverbal communication. And then finally is just staying sort of calm. And this becomes really important when you have adversity. Suppose there's something that, is going down that isn't necessarily good. And the more that you can kind of stay calm and not be all stressed and upset, the more that it affects your team positively in a calm fashion. So the more you kind of stay calm with your communication style, the better. Now, I tend to be animated. So I'm not saying don't be animated, but I'm saying, again, when there's adversity, which you'll see, what you'll have, the more that you can kind of stay calm through your body language and through your verbal communication, the better it is for your team. So another area to be an effective new manager is making sure that you give recognition to the team and understanding their motivators. So what motivates each of your team members? And this is important because people are motivated by totally different things. One person can be motivated by money. One person can be motivated by recognition. Another person can be motivated by promotions. So understanding what truly motivates each of your team members is important. So, it's all about understanding your people. That's critical. The more that you understand your people, the better the relationship that you're going to have. And recognition is key. So recognize often and make sure it's sincere. So I've seen recognition where it isn't sincere. Make sure that recognition is really coming from a place of sincerity, and understand how people want to be recognized. Some people get a little shy, so they don't want to be recognized publicly. So understand, is it public recognition? Is it private recognition? And make sure you recognize your high performers, all of the performers. It's important. We tend to forget this part. So make sure that you recognize folks, either privately, publicly, however that, they respond to it. And saying thank you goes a long, long way. A quick thank you. Thanks for doing a great job. I appreciate it. It goes a long way for the team members. So another area for being a great manager is identifying the group members very, very quickly. So your informal leaders, your high performers, your perceived problem employees, kind of those people who tend to question a lot, can sometimes be misunderstood as perceived problem people. You want to identify those folks quickly. And for the high performers, make sure you spend equal amount of time with your high performers. Now, I've heard of, the 80-20 rule, and you spend most of your time on low performers and all that. It really should be you spend equal time on your high performers. Your high performers will probably be the ones who they're not as vocal because they pretty much are doing a good job. Maybe they don't need, a lot of constructive feedback because they're doing a good job. But what your high performers do need, they need to feel valued. They need to be engaged. They need to feel like they're heard in terms of career aspirations. So make sure your high performers have the attention that they need, because your high performers, again, can be quiet, and if they're not engaged, they may leave, and that's the last thing you want. So recognizing like informal leaders, and a lot of times your informal leaders are those perceived problem employees. And I can tell you, from experience on this one, is that those folks can be your greatest advocates. They are the people who tend to be a little more vocal, but if you can get them to be part of a solution for issues and asking for their input, and having them be part of, say, a change management initiative or whatever it is to get them involved and help you lead, the better it is. These people are usually they're pretty darn smart. They're very valuable to the organization, but people tend to work against them. And what I encourage new managers or any manager is you work with them. You work with these employees because they can be your great, great advocates and really help you in the long run. So another piece of being a great new manager is you have to trust your team. Now, part of this is understanding that if you're a new manager, you probably came from maybe the peer group, and as an individual contributor, you're probably pretty darn good. That's why, maybe why you're in management. And while you were an individual contributor, you probably had a pretty good process in place and you're delivering the great results and all that. And what I would encourage you to do is just understand that there are different paths from point A to point B. So maybe somebody has a slightly different process. And really the key item is, as long as they're delivering the results and it's compliant and it's the right thing to do, let people take those different paths from point A to point B. If it's marking all the little boxes for compliance and meeting and all that, let people do it. Empower them to take a different path than maybe what you did. Allow for mistakes. So when, the more that you empower your team and the more that they're making their own decisions and autonomous, they'll make mistakes. You'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes. So how you handle people making mistakes is the key. So allow for mistakes, be supportive, make sure folks learn and yourself learn from mistakes, right? And move on. Allow the team to provide solutions. This is a big one. So what new managers tend to think is that they have to have all the solutions. And the individual contributors, the frontline associates, they're pretty darn smart. They have some great, great solutions. So allow them to provide as many solutions as possible. Now, it doesn't mean that they're all going to be implemented. And that's one thing that you communicate to your team is encourage people to provide these kind of solutions and suggestions, but let them know, hey, we may not implement them all, but keep them coming, right? Keep them coming and keep people posted on the status if they do provide solutions and suggestions. Another part of trusting your team is providing those opportunities for team members to really stretch outside their comfort zone. So everyone gets in that little comfort zone. They're happy in their little bubble and all that. But really, when you're interested in developing a team member, you start providing those opportunities to stretch them. And knowing that someone has your back, because you would have their back, you're stretching them. Maybe they make a little boo-boo, but if you have their back and you're there to support them, see them stretch, and they know you got your back, you're going to be instilling that trust, and that's important. So this next area we're going to talk about is what managers really dread, and it's performance management. Now, I have videos on performance management, difficult conversations, things of that nature. And I can tell you, performance management is one of those things that, especially new managers, they don't like it. They dread it because they visualize this horrible outcome that people are going to be upset. And if we think it's going to go that way, it will go that way. But from performance management or any kind of difficult conversation, how you get into the mindset, and this is really, one of the key roles as a manager. If you come from a place of really helping someone, like your job is to really help someone meet and exceed expectations, that you have a duty to help this person identify what their issue is so they can succeed, it makes the discussions go much easier because, again, your job is to help people meet and exceed expectations. You have a duty to help them, right? That's a job of the manager. So when you go into that performance management area, the first thing is, be proactive. Maybe it can be avoided. So address issues early on. And this goes into the discussion we had about being proactive versus reactive. So address issues early so they don't have to march down a performance management path. Okay. And before it becomes, say you do have to have a performance management discussion. They're not meeting it, they know this, and you have to have the discussion. Make sure when you go into the discussion with the person, do not assume that you know right away what the problem is. Okay? Ask questions, because you really want to do some fact finding, and ask questions and let them talk. Don't assume. The more that you can keep your mind and your energy very open, so that you're really listening to what the issue might be, the better it is that both of you can identify what the true root issue is. And that allows you to come up with a collaborative plan that the employee is really coming up with versus you. So it's much, much, much better when you're both sort of discovering what the root issue is, and the employee can come up with the corrective plan versus the manager, because again, the employee will have the buy-in. It's their plan. They came up with it, and that's much more powerful than a plan driven by the manager. Now, if you are, again, doing like a performance management sort of a document or even a verbal, make sure you have specific examples. So the worst thing you can do is you go into a discussion and you say, hey, Johnny, you're not answering your phone, or hey, Johnny, you're not meeting next expectations. And they're thinking, what do you mean? I am too. I always answer my phone. Well, make sure you have specific examples. If you're going to, don't talk in generalizations, basically. So if you're going to allege something's happening, make sure you have very specific examples so that you can show the employee. Okay. Now, you've come up with, say, this plan, with the associate, and maybe you say, okay, we're going to, follow up on after 30 days, we need you to meet, whatever expectation. Don't just wait for 30 days to come and see how they're doing. Make sure you're following up with that plan well before, say, 30 days. Maybe it's weekly, whatever you agree upon, because it's important. Just wonder if something needs to be tweaked in the plan. Again, your job is to make sure they meet and exceed expectations. So just giving them a plan and hoping that they implement those changes is somewhat wishful thinking, because performance management requires a change, and we're going to talk about change management and the important issue on change management a little bit later. So make sure you're following up maybe every week, and if something needs to be tweaked in the plan, do it quickly. And the last thing about performance management, and a lot of new managers, they may not even think of it this way, but who does this really reflect upon? on performance management, right? Is it the employee or is it the manager? If you have a team where everybody's on performance management, or say the majority is on performance management, what do you think the manager of that person is going to be thinking? They're going to be looking at the manager thinking, why is everyone on performance management in your team and another team that it isn't? It could question the effectiveness of the manager. So when you're thinking about performance managing people, who's it reflecting upon? It's reflecting on the manager. So if you keep that in mind, it's like, okay, I don't want my team on performance management. I want them to meet and exceed expectations. You start coming from a place of truly helping. Okay. So the next area we're talking about is it's not performance management, it's performance reviews and regular meetings. So being a great new manager is having very effective and value-added regular meetings and performance reviews with your staff. These are usually your one-on-one type of meetings. You have regular meetings, regular scheduled meetings with your staff, whether it's monthly, quarterly. I mean, usually performance reviews are every 6 months and every year. But then you have regular meetings in between that. These should be very value-added meetings because this is the employee's time to talk about their career. It could be a discussion where you're coaching them, but these are very value-added type of meetings. And so sometimes, maybe new managers don't know what to discuss, and then they start just talking about, chit-chatting about whatever. You should be very value-added discussions that really help the employee excel in their career aspirations, their engagement, things of that nature. In these regular meetings and performance reviews, there should be no surprises, especially in a performance review. So if Johnny has an issue say on performance, that should be addressed well before a performance review. It should be addressed either in a regular meeting or some sort of performance management discussion. A performance review should never ever have a surprise on a sort of constructive feedback where it's a sucker punch. Nobody likes that because what you'll have lack of trust building. Maybe you've had something on your performance review where you're like, well, why didn't you tell me that like 4 months ago? I would have fixed it. So no surprises. You always want to provide examples. If you have great feedback, if you have constructive feedback, you're always providing examples. Make sure people understand, what's being supported by whatever feedback is on the performance reviews. On those performance reviews, again, I have another video all about performance reviews and how to deliver these and things of that nature, but a couple of quick items. What I always thought was a good practice is providing your performance review to the employee before the meeting. So give them time to read and digest the information. It makes your time together much more valuable to the employee. So everybody processes information differently, and if you're just reading the performance review at the time of the meeting, you're processing. You may not be digesting all the information, and it's being read to you. It's much better when someone can just kind of read it. They can process it, and if they need to ask clarifying questions, they'll ask you. Now, here's what I can tell you. If you're telling someone all these items during the year, there's no surprises on a performance review. There's usually no questions. The questions come when you haven't told someone of an issue potentially on a performance review. So for me, best practices are provide the annual review before the meeting, schedule time. I strongly suggest 1 hour. 30 minutes just doesn't cut the mustard. Not scheduling any time is just unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. An hour. This is the employee's time. And really the majority of the time you're discussing career aspirations, what their goals are for the following year, and how you can help them be successful. So, important. Another key item for being an effective new manager is being yourself. What makes you unique? Bring that out. Avoid thinking that, okay, I'm a manager, I should be acting this way, so and so thinks I should act this way. Be yourself. Be yourself and let your own sort of uniqueness exude out of yourself, your being. If you make mistakes, you own it. This allows for vulnerability. They see people making mistakes, and it also sets a tone for if someone else makes mistakes. How are you reacting to it? So if you make mistakes, own it. Don't blame others. And again, the most important thing is you be authentic. If you're a little bit goofy, be a little bit goofy. If you're super positive, be super positive. Okay. Now you don't want to stick your head in the sand and not, avoid an issue. What I'm saying is whatever your true essence is, let it come out. Okay. As a manager, another key item to be an effective manager, new manager, managing managers, is you're accountable. So you're responsible for your team results. You got into a management position. You're not doing the work anymore. Your job is to lead your team to get the result. So you're responsible for all your team's results and all the behaviors. So if something goes wrong in your team, you're accountable for it. If something goes great for your team, you know who should be getting, obviously, the praise. It's your team members. So we talked about being humble in my first video. So if someone says, oh my gosh, Johnny, your team's doing great. Really the best response is, my team is fantastic. I've got a great team. They are producing phenomenal results. You really want the accountability to go into your team. But if something's going wrong, obviously it lies on you. So when you're accountable, you avoid blame. There may be things that it may not be your fault. Like, well, God, there's no way I could have known that. But you don't want it. You want to avoid the blame. Whether it is something that you should have known about or whatever, you're still the manager. You're accountable for it. So you want to avoid the blame. That is your manager is not going to like it if you're passing blame. Nobody likes that because, again, as a manager, you're accountable. So if mistakes are made, you own it. If your team makes a mistake, you advise the manager if need be. You bring in the right people, you fix it, you learn from it, and you move on. Simple as that. And again, just follow the sword. If there's a boo-boo, you just follow the sword and move on. You fix it and move on and learn from it. Another issue that I do see with new managers is a great relationship with now their manager. So it's the same principles that you want to have when you're managing your direct report group with your manager. You want to have effective communication. That communication is really, really important. So new managers tend to really spend a lot of time managing down, but they don't spend as much time managing up. And managing up is a critical relationship along with managing sideways to their peers. So effective communication is important. Providing and asking for feedback from your manager is important as well, because you want your team to do the same thing, right? You want your team to ask for feedback from you, and you want to be able to provide it. It's no different with your manager. So being open, being honest, being transparent, letting your manager know, what's going on, how you feel, being very clear is important. You want to make sure that there is no misinterpretation of messaging, between your manager, between your direct reports. And you don't want to assume. I've seen this a lot. New managers tend to think, well, my manager, I think they think this and that and the other, and they're assuming. And it's sometimes completely wrong. So do not assume. Just go in again like you're going in with a discussion with your peer group, with your direct report group. You go in with a very open mind so that you're able to listen, you're really hearing the message, and you're not assuming anything. But that relationship with your manager, a lot of times it's a breakdown. So it's important to understand managing down, managing sideways, and managing up. These are all three very important types of dynamics and relationships. Okay? So let's kind of wrap this up in a bow. So some of those key traits of being a great new manager is the accountability. So again, you're not doing the work anymore, your team's doing it, and you're accountable for their results, good or bad, and their type of behavior. So you're very accountable at this point. Accountability is actually, it's very empowering when you're accountable for the results. It's great. Key traits, helping others. You're really there to help to meet and exceed expectations, help to develop the people, and see them, succeed in whatever area they want to succeed. Trusting your team, empowering your team. So, the trust, that's a new one a lot of times for new managers, because again, they've been doing the individual contributor role for maybe a while. Now they have to trust their team to perform and meet and exceed those results. But it doesn't mean that you just let everyone do what they're going to do. It means that you're monitoring it and kind of tweaking it and giving the feedback when need be. But ultimately, you want to trust and empower your team. Being open and honest and transparent, very key. New managers, the more communication that you can be on being open and honest and transparent and being clear, the better. Being a good listener, really listening to your manager, really listening to your team is part of great communication. So your listening skills, step it up a notch on listening. If you're sometimes may not be a great listener, I would highly advise, if you need, additional resources. I have a video on the benefits and how to be a great listener, how to instill that. Very critical for being a good manager. Another trait, and when you're open and honest and transparent and you're a good listener, you tend to be more, relatable. Like you're understanding your people, right? Because you're listening to them. You're understanding what their motivators are, and you're understanding your team. So being able to understand your team and understanding if they're upset at something, if they're happy, you're celebrating their successes. If they're upset, you're talking to them about that. You want to be obviously, very relatable, not just in your little cubicle. Being proactive. Keep your molehills and don't let them become mountains. If there's an issue on the horizon, nip that sucker in the bud, so that it doesn't become a big fat problem. And finally, the other key trait is you want to make sure that you're including your entire team. So if you have team meetings, and be inclusive as possible. So include your team in solutions and problem solving and ideas. And the more that you can bring in the entire group and really create that team dynamic, like we're all in it together, the better. So I hope that you have enjoyed. If you're a new manager, someone who's thinking about going into management, I hope you got something out of it, out of our Part 2 video series of being a great new manager. And for additional resources, please visit my website or scheduling a session with me. I love to work with new managers, one of my favorite things to do. Visit my website at www.yourimpoweredyou.com, or you can email me at bman@yourimpoweredyou.com, or you can give me a buzz at 916-633-2555. And I thank you very much and have a very empowered day.